Okay, so welcome everyone. Please take a seat. Welcome to Harvard Israel Track 2016 closing event. Yay! So the point of this event is to reflect on our experience, but also mostly to thank everyone that has been involved and made this possible. So for you, of course, for being here and being with us throughout the trip. Also for our incredible donors. So we'll thank Joanna and Jonathan Jacobson, Seth and Beth Klarman, Terry and Brad Bloom, the CJP, Jeff and Deb Swartz, Steve Kay and Elizabeth Tarlow, and of course the Harvard Hillel staff, the formidable, that has helped us in our journey. So Annette, thank you so much for helping us with everything, practically. And everything that you didn't help us with, it was Miriam who was there to help. And Jonah, of course. Yes. And now that we're done with thank yous, we can move on to just say that we're closing another semester, another academic year and another year of Trek that we hope was successful. And before we'll hear from our 50 brilliant Harvard students, or at least some of them, about their thoughts and reflections and what we hope they gained from the Trek. We also want to say a few words about how important this Trek has been for us and the significance of the experience to the leaders.
All right. So, throughout the semester, we had ongoing deliberations and discussions about where we want to go and how we want to lead this trip, and of course, how to ensure the safety of everyone. There is never wrong or right when it comes to these types of decisions. And there are always things that we regret not seeing. However, at the end of the day, we just wanted to show you our home, and we can only hope that we hosted you well. We are infinitely grateful to all the support that we received. It's needless to say that without our donors who put their faith in us in terms of schedule and content, none of this would have been possible. So, thank you, truly, and we can only hope that you guys are as proud as we are for what we accomplished. On that note, let's hear Rob telling us a little bit about his experiences.
Thank you, yeah. Wow, that's very loud. I'm going to put this, can I pop this in here? There we go. I have a few words prepared. So when Lamore asked people if anyone wanted to say anything, I, of course, with my big mouth, jumped at the chance and said I would. So I'll try and keep this brief and not keep you here all evening. But I wanted to just say a few words because the trip really meant a hell of a lot to me as someone who had studied the conflict for about a year. I'm a history major, so I kind of really dug into the history behind the conflict. I really wanted to try and get a sense of what the conflict was like today. And coming back from the trip, I think all of us, when we came back, trying to explain it to our roommates of what it was like, it was just like amazing, like unbelievable, like incredible, and difficult to find any other words past those. And trying to boil the trip down into either a blog post or anything else was a real challenge. But I tried to really think if I could say one word about the trip, one thing I really gained from the trip. If I could sum that up in just one word, I think that word would be perspective. And I think through everything, you know, everyone who we met, everyone who we talked to, and both those of us who went on the trip obviously know, but also I think everyone, all the donors and the other guests here should know our itinerary, should know, you know, some phenomenal people we spoke to, and phenomenal perspectives we got from them. But I wanted to just touch on a couple of stories that I had from my own experience that other people may not have seen or other people wouldn't know about. And I think a couple of really amazing experiences came when we were in Jerusalem, and actually came when we were out in the evening, just unwinding, having a few macabes and just, you know, having some fun. And actually, we were in a bar, and I just stepped outside, and I was talking to Amir, our tour guide, who was talking to a couple of Jerusalemites, just a couple of guys who he was talking to, and the universal unifier that is football came up into conversation, and we started talking about Arsenal season. Turned out the guy was an Arsenal fan as well as me, and we just got talking, and I started talking to these guys, and slowly but surely things started turning a little bit more serious about what we were doing on the trip. And why we were in Jerusalem. And we actually, funny enough, just started talking about the refugee crisis within Europe and the refugees coming out of Syria. And they asked me what I felt about it and what I felt was happening in the UK. And I said, I personally don't feel the UK is doing enough. I think we should be taking more refugees. And they were aghast. They said, we don't understand why Europe's taking any refugees. These refugees, they come in and they bring crime and they rape your women. And I was very kind of shocked and taken aback by that. But being the trip that it was, I kind of, by this point, learned to not shy away from these things, but to kind of engage with them and talk to them about it. And they really offered a perspective that showed how ingrained the conflict is in people's everyday lives within Israel. These are two men, 25, 26 years old, who've grown up in Jerusalem and had lived with this conflict every single day. And their perspective was one that I knew wasn't the majority perspective, but it was one nonetheless that existed. And it taught me a lot about the challenges of finding a solution to this conflict when people have grown up and really become so ingrained with these tensions and these conflicts. But on the flip side of that, another phenomenal experience we had was when we were out in the Shuk one evening and seeing people out and dancing and sharing, drinks, sharing life really, and really enjoying being together and just in each other's company. And seeing just how alive the city is and how alive Israel is was phenomenal. Speaking to Gal, some of the things I said to Gal, who sadly can't be with us this evening, one of the great things I loved was being able to see everyday life on the ground in Israel, and not just being able to meet Gal's parents and his family, but be able to sit down and break bread and share a meal with them was an experience that was really touching for us as well. So that's one aspect of perspective, but I think another aspect that I think is really unique to this trip is the fact that we managed to go with 50 other Harvard students. It was such an amazing group of people to go with, everybody who was challenging, everyone who was engaged, thoughtful, offering their own perceptions, their own perspective on the conflict. I often said that at times we'd have all these phenomenal speakers and I'd be thinking, I should ask a question, I've got to have something I must ask, but I can't quite articulate what that question is. And the next thing I know, someone to my right would put their hand up and ask the exact question that I had burning in my head, but I didn't quite know it. And that was just something that was truly unique to this trip, I think, is the ability to go, not just with, I'm not trying to say Harvard students, but like 50 people who are so engaged and who are so switched on and so think so thoughtfully and think so sympathetically and empathetically, was just one thing that I think really makes this trip so unique and is an experience that I hope certainly that other classmates of mine, I as a senior now leaving, obviously some of our classmates won't be able to, but people in lower classes really hope that they can have this opportunity to go and visit and see, a country that is thriving but very much has this conflict always in the back of the conversation. And hopefully the more people I think that can be exposed to the situation right now, the more chance there is of finding a resolution to the conflict, one that is, I think we all saw is so desperately needed and both wanted, I think, in the country. So those are my thoughts. I said I wouldn't waffle on for too long, but I hope that resonated with some of you guys who went on the trip and gave some of the guests here a bit of an insight into what we felt was really great about this trip. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rob, for your thoughts. Now we're gonna spice things up with a panel. So Cameron, Tudor, Kat, and is Bo here? Didn't see him. Great. So take a seat, and we're just gonna ask you kind of a few questions to give you a chance to reflect on what this trip was and share your different perspectives. Yeah.
On Junior 24. I'm not surprised in the slightest.
Did I show you these photos? What was the question? What's the surprise? So my name is Bo. I'm a junior in FOHO. I study social studies. The thing that surprised me most was I think there's a very interesting relationship of how the old relates to the new in Israel because on one hand, probably per square feet, it has the most number of sacred objects, old objects, like single-digit BCs, and those aren't numbers that you hear often. And at the same time, it's a really new country, and so a lot of the political institutions are very new. It seems like it was especially striking in Jerusalem that everything was the same color, and for me, it just seemed like the kind of color that you might try and use that pixel tool on Paint to figure out on a picture of old Babylon or something, like what an ancient city color might be, and it was just that everywhere, and that seemed very jarring to me because it was clearly a very new paint job trying to be old. So that was really surprising to me about Israel, that it was an old place and very much a new one at the same time.
Okay. Yes, sure. My name is Cameron. I'm a sophomore at the college. The associate professor of Persian studies. You're right. And one of the two resident Republicans on the trip. But Andrew, did you see his Facebook post? Unbelievable, very good history. So I think one thing, perhaps many people here know this, certainly the Trek leaders and some other people know, but perhaps I didn't know until half an hour ago when someone told me. But today in Israel is Holocaust Remembrance Day, where a siren will sound across the entire country, and for a minute, correct me if I'm wrong, please, people will stop their cars in the highways, people will stop in the middle of town squares, stop in the middle of their meals and everything, and just for one moment have a national moment of remembrance of the Holocaust. And I think obviously many of us knew the scale of the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, 5 million non-Jews killed in the Holocaust. We knew the scale and the size of the event, and at least for me, before I went to Israel and really and had in-depth interaction with people who had such ingrained experiences with it, for me, the Holocaust was to the Jews what 9/11 was to us. It was a national tragedy. It was huge and it was terrible. But to get to Israel and see the national connection that every person has nearly to the Holocaust, despite being now nearly 70 years removed, is really quite something. I think the connection that the people have, Jews and non-Jews alike, to the Holocaust and to an event where nearly the entire population of Jews of the world was wiped out is really quite startling. And really, I remember what was just so cool, at least for me, was being at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And all of you have been there, those of you who haven't, starts as a very dark, wide, almost triangle, and it gets more narrow, and finally you're on this beautiful, it was sandy and we couldn't see, but it was what was supposed to be a very beautiful vista, and full of light and continually leading upwards. And that to me spoke a lot to what I think the state of Israel is intended to be, and there are problems, and they have to fix them, but for people who have come from such darkness only 70 years ago, are trying to push themselves on a path towards this light where they have not only the opportunity to have such recent history be so present for them, but also a responsibility to their faith and to people of the world to really make sure people know about this and know that this wasn't just a small event, that it wasn't just their 9/11, it was something far greater than that. And they also have a responsibility to human rights and human dignity around the world. And it's a special obligation the Jewish people and the people of Israel have. And that was what really surprised me, was just how ingrained the memory of that event still is in Israel today.
I guess sort of to continue on that, I guess what definitely struck me regarding the Holocaust is this sort of national genetic memory that implicitly colors a lot of the social life and the political life in Israel, that it's impossible to sort of discern from a lot of the very sketch media accounts, especially in Western media, and sort of understanding that from a sociological point of view is completely different, and I guess really hard if you're not really on the ground. But sort of on a different note,
what really surprised me. I guess also a matter of sample bias, because we had a very, very privileged account of social and political life and to all parts of that spectrum. But there's the amount of sort of engagement and sort of intellectual maturity that a lot of these very sort of politically and socially engaged people that we met brought to the table. So everyone seemed completely aware of the larger debate and of the arguments of, like, all the nuances of the arguments of the other sides. And even though, like, all the facts presented by all sides were right, but of course they were sort of selected to conform to a certain narrative. And I guess, to me, that sort of represented, I guess, like a very human need in the face of very complex situations to just build models and build understanding of the situation based on, I guess, interpretation of facts. But then again, to me personally, that put people in front of politics and history.
Hi. Whoa. Ooh. I'm Kat. I'm a senior in Adams House, also studying social studies. I think before I went on the trek, I already kind of thought that there would be a lot of layers of experience you could have in Israel, such that if I were to go like by myself and just have like a fun, like frivolous time in Tel Aviv, it would be great, but it would be very different than this trip. But I think to me, what I was most surprised by is there was a very interesting several days when one day we spoke with a Jerusalem city councilor who described herself as sort of a secular individual, and she spoke of how she was frustrated by the fact that there was basically government funding given to very, very Orthodox Jews who were basically spending all their time, these male members of Jerusalem, just sort of studying and reading and basically just sort of not basically contributing to economic output stuff. And that was her perspective. And then I think a lot of us walked away from it being like, okay, like that's sort of, that's a reasonable argument. And then it was either the next day or the day after that we spoke with, I think he was a rabbi, he was a Hasidic Jew, and he was a very exceptional individual, I think. And that, and I said that in a very positive way, because we were definitely asking, we came in with a very specific bias because we had this previous talk like the day before, and we asked him very pointed questions, some rather accusatory, admittedly, and he explained things to me in a way which, even though I personally, as I would say as a woman, couldn't agree with certain things that he was stating, it was incredible like how much I understood sort of a mentality which before that was just so inaccessible to me. And there was one particular point of argument which I found so unique and compelling, which I never considered before, and which was, he was basically saying that, you know, I could be very much poorly restating what he said back then, but he was saying that historically of the various tribes, there's always one tribe which was just committed to sort of studying basically like the scriptures, and that basically Israel as a state could not have come together. Was there not an emphasis on preserving these teachings and people who just dedicated their lives to these teachings, and that Israel as a state could not have survived without people who just spent all their lives basically studying the Torah. And to me, that was something I'd never considered before. And I think that one particular panel we had just really changed my view in terms of understanding, like Rob was saying, perspective, in terms of getting a new perspective on people's very different lifestyles, which may be very different from my own, but which I finally felt that I could come to some approximation of fathoming.
Thank you. The other question we wanted to ask is, assuming that we want to continue this tradition next year, what would you like to say to people who haven't been on this trip yet? What should they expect, or should they expect? If you had one thing to say to them, what would it be?
What I would say, and I say this a lot, but I think this particularly makes sense with this question, is I would say you don't know what you don't know. And I think going on this trip, again, open my eyes, it's a very cliche statement, but I think it made me realize like how little I really knew about things which I thought I knew something about. And so what like Rob said, when our friends ask us how's a trip, it's very hard to explain it because you can't be like, oh, it's like XYZ, because it's really not like anything the other at all. So it's a sort of thing where you have to fully immerse yourself to believe it, basically.
I guess really very pleasantly surprised by the people that I went on a trip with. I feel like it's, well, I mean, it's in the best way possible, not necessarily a representative sample of people of our age. So it's like even if most of us, probably all of us, came in with very sort of well-defined sort of normative positions on all of these religious, moral, political issues, like people like dealt with like a lot of difficult subjects very maturely. And to some extent, it might be that these people that go to Israel Trek are the people who benefit the least from this exposure because they already have this maturity. But I guess in the end, it really comes down to analyzing, like being able to sort of assume your own biases and, like, critical thinking in college, being able to, like empathize with other points of view, all of that. But it's very different to internalize that in a situation in which the stakes are really high, and in a situation in which, like, even sort of very clear your moral codes from home don't really apply, and in which every sort of there's no binary sort of spectrum. It's incredibly multidimensional in a sense, and every side has like very conflicting attitudes. So, for instance, when we met with the Prime Minister of the PA, his opinions were like very vehemently contradicted by the people we met in Nazareth. Although like they probably think that they're pretty much on the same side of some part of the spectrum. So, I guess, sure, fight your biases, but be ready to acknowledge it's not easy. So it's a little meta.
This is kind of in line with what both Kat and Tu have already said. Kat said, you don't know what you don't know, and that's true. But I think a corollary to that is, like, try to know what you don't know. Try to come in understanding that you don't, despite what Rob said, that we're all relatively perhaps cultured, if not sophisticated people who have at least read something or know something. But it's called a straw man, okay? No, what you're saying, the opportunity to go on a trip like this with 50 Harvard students, if not 50 university students, who, to varying degrees, but at least have some basis of knowledge of the conflict and of the current political, social, economic conflicts, that's a real opportunity. But like I said, I think this is similar to what I shouldn't even be talking, but I'm just going to take the opportunity to talk about it because that's what Harvard students do. Like really, as I said, try to know what you don't know and understand where there are things that you could learn more about. And I don't think you should necessarily go, like I considered for a few weeks before, these are like reading every Wikipedia article about the conflict and about Israel and about Bibi Netanyahu and about the joint list, whatever. But I think it's a far more, it's a far better opportunity to just go and listen to people and hear the people who are talking, because obviously, as we talked about, we heard so many diverse people from the Joint List, Barkat from the mayor of Jerusalem, the mayor of Jerusalem's like arch nemesis, like 2 out of only 30 who was like not part of his coalition. Like that's a brutal thing to be part of. But we heard so many cool people talk, so just go in knowing what you don't understand. And also I would say, like, I think some of my favorite times of the trek were like at the back of the bus or wherever you sat, like on the bus, like talking about, like after you left, like talking about like what just happened. Like we had this like heated, great discussion, like but a very good discussion after we met with the people of the Joint List, and after we met with Nir Barkat, and like just those conversations were probably some of my favorite times on the trek, like talking about like everyone telling me why my opinion is wrong, and like me totally appreciating that, and that's totally valid, and it probably is, but whatever, I'll still talk about it. But like just engage in those conversations because they were so fun, and like you will not likely change your opinion, but as has been said, you will gain respect for the opinions of others and realize that when it's your friends having these opinions, It's not just some Palestinian or some Israeli or some Jew or some Muslim having this opinion. It's your friends who you've come to know over the past, 10, 11 days. So talk about your opinions and talk about what you've been feeling and what you've been learning. Because, those are some of my favorite times of the trip, and I think you'll certainly find the same thing.
One thing I've been thinking a lot about, and one thing that I'd like to emphasize to people is, what do you do once you get back from the trip? Because I think one funny feature of complexity, which is what we deal with when we travel and we hear a lot about these things, is that it can be paralyzing. We can just say, well, it's just complex, and we don't need to do anything about that, or we can't do anything about that. But I think what's very special about this trip is that it gives you the resources to fight that with what you've got, which is your mind, which has been taught things that you otherwise really would have missed, and more importantly, a community. So it's really good to see everybody's faces again, and it really just is the highlight of my week when I see you guys like at Brain Break and all of those things. And so I think to have, and from a donation perspective, like I'm very appreciative of the fact that it wasn't just a trip that we took, but that it was a contribution to a building of a certain community, that we still go to many of the events in Hillel and see each other and talk about it after the fact, that we have events like this where we get together and continue to engage with that. So that's a really, really special thing. And I think I can see how, we hear trips about things like birthright trying to be ideologically skewed in a certain respect or something like that. I can see how that works, which is if you see that a place is not what you thought it was, it can often get in the way of doing anything about it. And I feel like one thing that this is doing very well, and I think one thing it should continue to do, is to try and resist complexity being a source of paralysis versus deep thinking about it and continuing to do something. And I think that's been a really great part of the trip for me.
Okay, and final question. We would love to ask you more. We have like a bunch of stuff.
If we talk too much there.
Yeah, no. I'd love to hear you. It's like this is too many. So, just to make sure you actually learn something from this trip. Best hummus place in Israel.
I'll take that one. Yeah. I'm gonna thank God I can say something after Bo, and it's not like some eloquent, whatever, perfectly written essay. But the best hummus place ever was after we had just left that woman's house we made challah in, and I must say Rob made an excellent challah, and so did everyone else. But yours was pretty good. It was unbelievable challah, so good. But after that woman who was guiding us around Jerusalem, when we went to, like, I think she said it was like the second restaurant in all of Jerusalem or something, and like just on like almost like a bar coming out of the restaurant, she just like put down like 7 plates of hummus and was teaching us how to dip it properly, and no one really did, and she just grabbed the pita and got like probably 4 pounds of hummus and like one pita this big. So that was the best pita, in all of, Hud's is a close second, but that one is pretty good.
This is a question for me, I know, because I have to answer it. The best hummus place in the world is definitely the one you took us to, somewhere in South Jaffa, I think. Abu Hassan, of course. It was this really smoky, kind of like sketch-looking joint with these waiters don't acknowledge customers, run around and scream, and like this very organized chaos. But the food's also really good. So, yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as everything, it's a metaphor for the state. Yeah. Everything is a metaphor for the state.
Any suggestions to that? Or are you good? Okay, well, thank you so much. And now that we're back with the mic, I'm gonna ask Max to come and talk to us about Hebrew. For a while. I'll prepare your slides.
All right. Looks like it's going to be pretty serious. I promise it won't be. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Hebrew and language in Israel. So it's great to see everyone here again. I guess I just wanted to start it off by having everyone think about all the different places that we went to. I mean, we saw so many places. And if you were to map out all the places that we went to, you can see that Shlomi literally schlecked us all the way around the entire country of Israel. Now, that meant that we were on the bus for a lot of time, and it gave us plenty of time to sit and have meaningful discussions about all of the speakers that we had seen, and of course, to sleep. Now, when I wasn't on the bus dreaming about falafel, I spent a lot of time looking out the window. And from the moment that we touched down in Tel Aviv, I was happy to see that all of the signs in Israel are transliterated into the Latin alphabet. So I got curious, and I started to try to figure out, okay, Nazareth, how can it only be 4 letters in Hebrew? So, I'd be staring out the window for hours and hours, sort of trying to match up, oh, what do you think this letter is? It looks like an M, is that one right there? And I remember I read a sign out loud in Hebrew, and Amir said, wow, how did you do that? I'm so impressed. And I was totally puzzled because there are only 4 letters in Hebrew. You have the ones that look like an N, all the ones that are just a backwards R. There's the 3 that are just a straight line. And of course, you have all of the ones that are just Ys. Now, I'm taking it easy on you guys. This is the modern Hebrew alphabet, which is a lot easier to read than the old one. My particular favorite is this line right here. You can see that S, N, N, M, and other M are all exactly the same. And interestingly enough, the letter K, Ch, B, V, and G, all the same letter. However, if you put the work in, you'll find that, it's worth it. You can read everything from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the label on your bottle of Pinot Noir from Golan Heights Winery. Anyways, so, I was really interested in language on the trip, and one of the sort of most striking moments of our trip happened at the very beginning when we went to the YMCA in Jerusalem, and, we had that wonderful tour. We went up to the top of the tower, and I remember our wonderful tour guide told us, here at the YMCA we have this great thing going on where all these people from all these ethnicities and nationalities are coming together to just work out and play basketball and play tennis. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is it. This is how we're going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, it's just such a no-brainer. If you can get people together in a room, doing the same thing, you'll just see that everyone is human and everyone can get along. Now, at our talk with Mrs. Wharton the next morning, it was a little bit of a reality check. Somebody brought up, this wonderful program at the YMCA, and she said, well, it's awesome that they're doing that, but the fact of the matter is, most Israelis and Palestinians don't even speak the same language. So, strangely enough, this reminded me of the Ukraine. So, you might not know, I have the world's most random part-time job at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. And one thing that they talk a lot about there is language politics. So, in Ukraine, as you may or may not know, there's Russian and Ukrainian, these 2 languages. And it actually it's very important. Language politics affect everything from, education to healthcare to, municipalities, and it really does touch everything. And if you take a look at this map of Ukraine here, you might sort of get a taste for just how complex the situation is. And what makes it even more complicated is it really depends on who's drawing the map. So if you look at this one here, which was probably made by somebody who speaks Ukrainian, you can see almost all of Ukraine speaks Ukrainian. And then if you look at this one, which was probably made by a Russian, everyone speaks Russian. So, they have this very complicated thing going on in Ukraine, and everyone says, it's this crazy conflict, it's so complicated, it can never be solved. This is a map of Israel. So if the Ukraine conflict is so confusing and so hard to solve, you take a look at a map like this and you just go, wow. And I think that really one of the biggest things that I'm going to come away from this trip having is a more nuanced understanding of just how complicated the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, and really just how complicated it is having everyone get along in this region of the world. So, although I was very interested in alphabets and languages, on a trip all throughout Israel, Ironically, I think that the moments that are going to stick with you the most are the ones where I was speechless. So, I think back to when we were standing in awe underneath, the Western Wall, just one of those really crazy moments. I think back to when we were completely out of breath at the top of Masada, unable to form words. I think about when we were angrily not speaking to each other after a controversial talk. And especially I like to think about when we couldn't hear each other over the sound system at a club in Tel Aviv. So yeah, strangely enough, I think that really the moments when we were at a loss for words were the ones that we experienced most deeply together. So I'm going to leave you guys. Now that I've taught you Hebrew, you'll be able to read this. It says ahava, which means love in Hebrew, and I love this picture, so I thought I'd leave you with that. So thank you so much to all of you for making this trip so amazing, to the Trek leaders for doing everything, and especially to the donors for making it possible.
Thank you very much, Max, for sharing your insight. I'd like to invite Bianca and Ve to share their reflections.
We'll introduce ourselves. Hi.
Hi, I'm Vade. I went on the trek last year, 2015.
And I'm Bianca. I went on the trek this year. So we wanted to share with you reflections on the trek from one year to the next from our participant perspective.
Right, so to get on with it. So, so during last trek, on March 17th, Israel had its election for the 20th Knesset, and the incumbent Benjamin Netanyahu was victorious, and he retained his role as prime minister. And for us on the trek last year, this was a huge point of discussion over the course of the week, and it gave us a really interesting perspective into understanding the political factions and ideologies of both the region as well as the ideologies of our own trek leaders.
Yeah, but so in contrast this year, well, as the US is gearing up for its own presidential election, I think that was something that was very much on our guest speakers' minds and on the minds of the people who we met while we were in Israel. And given the recent developments, what may become a hotly contested election could have some pretty serious implications for US-Israel relations and the state of the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I think it's interesting to juxtapose how the shift of the election year has gone from Israel to the US.
Last year, we also had the privilege of visiting the Dome of the Rock and the Holy Sepulchre, and got a really authentic view into many of the last many centuries of religious diversity in Jerusalem. And we had a few more days in the city, and we got to explore each corridor of the city more thoroughly. And in contrast,
this year, tensions within the old city seemed much higher. We glimpsed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and didn't even have a chance to go near the Dome of the Rock. And so that was, I think, just made evident in our minds how much things have changed even over the year. But yet, for the first time, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of our trek leaders was Arab Israeli, and I think that offered us greater access to the Palestinian perspective of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So I'm thinking specifically of when we went to Nazareth and we had the chance to meet with Palestinian members of the Knesset. And I think that was a pretty special experience.
yeah, and at least for me personally, being in a room full of people that now are at least somewhat knowledgeable about this topic, and myself being able to talk at least in small part about this topic, is really special because it's really only possible because of the trek. This experience has been really educational for us in ways that is definitely far kind of above and beyond what we would learn at Harvard in classes. We learn, things from professors beforehand, and maybe we attempted some readings before going on the trek. I know I picked up a book, I didn't really read it, but actually going to the places that we talk about, and having these long-lasting impressions are really way more compelling than section discussions and the like.
Yeah, so I'd like, just echoing that, this has been the most educational experience that I've had here, because not only am I sitting and listening to professors as we listened and engaged with professors in the many weeks leading up to the trek. But we actually got to go and experience for ourselves what was happening, and I think that's a very, very unique experience. Oh yeah, and even what's even better about this experience is that we came away with meaningful friendships.
Right. Yeah. So we talked about some political reasons for there being some differences on the trek last year versus this year. But both years we had camping trips in the desert.
Which was my first time camping.
We had hikes up to the top of Masada. We splashed in the Dead Sea, and we kind of experienced these salty desert winds and all of that, thousands of miles away from home. And the trek leaders really opened us up really opened up their homes to us, and the warmth of their abodes really kind of dissolved the qualms that we have in talking to each other in a very legitimate and very open way, and that's really special, I think.
Yeah, I think only violent Masada winds and salty, like painfully salty Dead Sea water can bring us together and make bonds like what we had. So I just to summarize all of this, I think all of the track leaders did an absolutely amazing job giving us a very nuanced view of the situation in Israel and gave us the space to talk about these issues freely in a non-judgmental space, which I think is something that's hard to come by nowadays. And so just for that, thank you so much, Giora, Limor, Gal, who's not here, Erez, Yael, and Yaman for just these 2 years of incredible experiences, and thank you to the donors for making it possible. I think we only wish that more of our classmates had the chance to experience what we did. So,
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing your reflections. So you mentioned so Yaman was a leader this year as well, an Arab Israeli. Unfortunately, he couldn't come. He got stuck in the lab. He had to redo something. And actually, on the first trek 3 years ago, there was also an Arab Israeli representative. So we're coming to another closing event. I'd really like to thank everyone that participated this year. It was really special. It's really not obvious that every year like the trek will happen. There are so many variables that kind of need to align up together in order for this to happen. I remember that at the beginning of the year, Yael was kind of telling everyone, okay, so we'll have a trek this year. And Yael started talking with all different people, and then we had the first meeting, and then somehow it rolled into this moment. I was going to actually talk about the Holocaust Remembrance Day, but Cameron, you did such a great job at that. So I'm just going to mention that actually there is an exhibit about the Holocaust Remembrance Day just right out the hall to the right, so you're welcome to visit that as we finish here. It's interesting, as Cameron, you did such a great job at explaining it. So today is the Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel, but a week from now is actually the Remembrance Day for the fallen soldiers in Israel, and the day after is the Independence Day. So it's really this sharp transition from remembering all the loss that Israel has had into its independence and thinking about the future. So thank you very much, and Giola.
Yeah, so just a few last closing words. Won't keep you here for too long. So we really, I think we all appreciate kind of all the perspectives and insights that you had, and to hear them again, just for me, it was invaluable, and just remember like the caliber of the people who went on this trek, so thank you guys so much. And we hope that, with a little bit of insight and sympathy and conversation, it can go a long way to potentially find solutions for really, really big problems. So we're really thankful, speaking on behalf of all the trek organizers for this experience. And so we just want to thank the donors again, Joanna and Jonathan Jacobson, Seth and Beth Klarman, Terry and Brad Bloom, the CJP, Jeff and Deb Schwartz, Steve Kay and Liz Tarlow, and the staff of Harvard Hillel. You've been so invaluable and so helpful in every step of the way, and every concern from booking a room to like needing another form signed to, you know, anything from the smallest stuff to the really big things. You helped us and kind of got us all to this point. So yeah, just like give a large round of applause to yourselves and to the staff. Thank you. And one last thing is that we have a few surprises waiting. You probably don't know what they are, but Limon will lead you to them. So, and yeah, come get wine, food.
So before we go and get food and wine, a couple of us just wanted to come up here and celebrate the trip leaders as well. We got something for you. I'm sure we can tell them thank you a gazillion times for what was an amazing experience, but we thought that you guys deserve your own 3 minutes. So why don't all the trip leaders come up? Yeah, no, thank you guys for designing what was definitely a transformative experience for all of us. So, do you guys have any things to say as an acceptance speech, or not really? Okay.
My parents.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much.